Yesterday, off camera, I put up the rest of the wire over the top of this chicken tractor. That's supposed to keep predators out and also support a tarp. I didn't record that because it was raining while I was working and I didn't want to get my camera wet. So all I need to do is put one more piece of fencing up to plug that end over there, and then I'm going to put a tarp on top. So stick around and let's see if I can get that done.
All right, let's get into it. I folded over some extra hardware cloth we had just to kind of close up that back gable. It's not really secured down with any wire or zip ties yet, but that'll come in the future. What I really want to do is just get this structure shaded and protected from rain so we can get the chicks in here. It rains a lot up on our mountain in the summer, so it's important to have that tarp. But also we've been having a heat wave lately where it's been getting over 80 degrees, actually close to 90. And that's why it's the perfect time to get them out of their brooder and start living outside, because the lows at night are plenty within their range that they should be acclimated to by now. I just used some random bungee cords to hold down the tarp. This is all just temporary as an experiment just to see how they do at night before we spend more money and resources really trying to secure the coop into a more permanent capacity. But one thing we are worried about is predator pressure. We haven't actually seen any signs of predators this year, but last year, shortly before we moved to our property, our existing chickens that we brought with us from Raleigh got killed by some sort of predator. We don't know if it was a hawk or a fox, but we definitely know there's bear activity in the area, and for that reason, we purchased a 1-joule energizer that we plan to electrify our garden fence with. But you can see here, I'm just doing an experiment. I just unboxed our electric fencing order from Premier One. And before I mount anything permanently, we're just going to give this a temporary test just to energize one line, probably 6 inches from the ground around the chicken tractor. Our idea is that we can eventually make this permanent on the chicken tractor as long as we keep the tractor a couple feet from our garden fence. We could use kind of like a jumper cable type thing. It's like 2 alligator clips connected with a piece of wire. We can run that from this small section of fencing to our permanent garden fence once that's electrified. But for now, I just need to run out my extension cord spool, and we're going to put the energizer, ground wire, and the full configuration here at the chicken tractor. We're not quite ready to move it to the garden yet, but in our next video, you will most likely get to see how that worked. You can see here I have some insulated wire. It's very well insulated in the sense that there's no way you could accidentally touch the energized wire in there unless you had access to one of the ends. And I'm just going to use like a 3-foot scrap of this. I don't want to waste too much. I don't want to cut it in the wrong spot because we're going to need a lot more of this to go from fence post to fence post around our gates once we energize our fence. With the ground rod buried, with the extension cord and the energizer ready to go, now it's time for me to relax a bit and kind of take a look at my handiwork. As homesteaders, it's very exciting for us that we can finally raise our own meat source. It's definitely going to cost more than grocery store meat, but we get to control the quality of life for our meat source. We can make sure that they have fresh pasture to forage on every day. We can make sure they have clean water and organic feed to keep them healthy and strong. We can regulate their temperature and keep them dry and shield them from predators the best we can. And that's about the best we can do for them on the short time they have here on the earth.
All right, these birds are almost ready for their first night on the grass. They've been on top of wood shavings their entire lives so far, ever since we got them. They've either been in a storage tote or this modified IBC tote. Anyway, I plugged this in for just a minute to test it. I was hearing the pulse clicking noise, and I'm assuming that means it works. I don't have a tester, and I'm not really in the mood to get shocked right now. But I think what I'm going to do is get out my motion-activated wildlife camera, set it up on like a chair or something over here, just to keep watch on this all night. And we'll have this on. I elevated that off the ground because the ground's very wet. I don't want to cut this rope yet until we know this is exactly the design we're looking for. But that's elevated off the ground because I don't want it to ground itself out. This isn't as deep as it needs to go. I think I hit our septic infiltrator, and with this short of a run and with how saturated the soil is right now, I think it's going to be fine for this night. But all I have to do is elevate that energizer off the ground so it doesn't ground itself out, and plug this in and make sure that the alligator clip is going from the electric output on that energizer right to there. I think that's about it. I just need to make sure the chicks here have provisions for the night. Some kind of bungee cord, a piece of hardware cloth over the door here, because I haven't built a door yet. I have some hardware cloth down here. And there are a few gaps in the upper part, but we haven't seen any predators out this year near our garden. So about 20 feet that way is our solar shed. We have a motion light there. One of our egg birds is visiting. Hey, little Orpington. How are you? Hey, don't peck me. Anyway, that's about it for our experiment. I'm going to see if I can verify that this is working. Maybe I can look up some tricks online to see how to test an electric fence without getting shocked. That would probably have been a valuable thing for me to have looked at before.
As I sit here editing this video, it's been about a week since we brought them out to the pasture. They've been successfully living inside of this chicken tractor. No one has escaped yet, and we still haven't seen any evidence of predator activity. But one thing you should know is we have electrified our garden fence, and that video I can confirm will be coming up pretty soon. And we can move the chicken tractor along the fence line and simply clip it on to keep it energized. I was able to figure out how to test the electric fence without getting shocked, and it involved wearing my sandals there, not big boots, and carrying a small weed or piece of grass that's not too dry. I started by putting one end of the grass in my hand and the other end touching the electric rope, and I kept moving it closer and closer until I could start to feel the pulse. Anyway, it's time to get back to some overdue construction and improvements on the chicken tractor. I cut a couple scraps of pressure-treated 2x4 at these 45-degree angles just to provide some bracing to prevent racking while I'm moving the chicken tractor. The next thing I want to do is get rid of the bungee cords that are kind of just tacking down the tarp here. We do get a lot of wind from time to time, and those bungee cords were all different lengths and the corners were at different tensions, so it's very likely that one of them could kind of pop off, and then they wouldn't have the shade and rain protection anymore. And also, Cedar really likes bungee cords and hooks, so when he walks by, he tends to take them off without telling me. So I got a few washers here and a few stainless steel screws, which were the only ones with heads big enough to fit and lock down the washer. Basically just permanently holding these down with screws. Obviously I can remove the screws, but they're not going to be as easy to remove as the bungee cords, and we're going to have a lot more of them than the bungee cords. So with one side done, I then moved over and then realized the tarp actually doesn't reach the 2x4. So I had to angle the screws down and pull the tarp. I can always adjust the other side, but this doesn't have to be elegant, it just needs to be functional. So this is the part that you've probably all been waiting for, the actual demonstration of the chicken tractor. You can see here I just lift up each back corner just to pop on these old wheelbarrow wheels that we salvaged. We have that 1/2-inch carriage bolt sticking out permanently, and since the length of the carriage bolts is probably twice the width of the wheel, there's not really much risk of the wheel falling off. But then I just grab the strap and start sliding it forward. The problem that I run into these days is these meat birds aren't really scared of me anymore. I used to rely on that fear to get them to lead the way and stay at the front of the tractor. But now there's a few birds that like to stick around on my end of the tractor, which makes it dangerous because I get some momentum when I'm pushing and it's hard to stop. And if they have a firm stance on the ground, I could easily break their legs or squish them. So I like to make some noise, maybe kick the tractor, smack the hardware cloth just a little bit to try to incentivize them to move forward. But as you can see, as I move forward, I then reveal a few boards that I have in there for them to perch on at night. There's also a small tray in there that we put their food in. And the mason jar feeders and this water jug are too big for me to lift the tractor over without the birds being able to escape. So that's why I pull those out first. Next, I refill their food jar and their food tray just to make sure they have provisions for the night. And this is actually their bedtime routine. I don't know what time of day most people typically move their tractors, but I do it in the evening to make sure they're not sleeping in their own poop. You can see here we're still using this temporary mattress frame for a crib just to kind of seal up the door, and then there's some hardware cloth that I cover the bottom with. But once I'm done touching all these metallic parts, it's time to energize the electric rope that, in theory, will protect the chicken tractor from predators. My intent of this clip was to show you the full process of how I move the chicken tractor each day, but I forgot to remove the wheels. But it's a very simple procedure that you can see here. So one thing I've been struggling with is a feeding solution to make sure they have enough food for the day. Right now, I just go out there multiple times a day and refill the bowl and the mason jar. Well, that's not very sustainable, especially because the birds are getting really big. Our egg birds are about a month older than these meat birds, but as I'm recording this audio right now, our meat birds have actually surpassed our egg birds in size. So they're definitely at the point where they need a lot of food. I went ahead and ordered 5 bags of meat bird food. I think they're 40-pound bags, and I don't know if that's going to be enough, but it should last us the next couple weeks. So what I'm working on here is a prototype stand for a PVC trough feeder. I'm using some scraps of zip sheathing that I had lying around just to see if this proof of concept would work. And what I mean by that is using a hole saw to cut a hole in the middle of a little square of sheathing, using the circular part to plug the pipe, and using the square part as a stand. So now that the prototype worked, I'm actually going to build a permanent solution. So I'm getting out my speed square and a pencil here to actually mark the center of the square, because if I have 2 stands that are both centered, it's going to make the feeding trough roughly flat, at least level with the grade of whatever it's sitting on. So I'm going to take this hole saw and just start cutting some holes in these things. You can see here I'm using my boots as a bit of a clamping mechanism, just so my workpiece doesn't spin around and hit me in the ankles. It seemed to work pretty well. And now that I have the plugs ready to be pushed into each end, I decided to drill a tiny pilot hole so I can install 2 drywall screws in each of these plugs. This is going to ensure that as we move the chicken tractor and refill their feed, while it's jostling around, the plugs aren't going to come out and let the food fall all over the ground. The drywall screws also make it so these plugs are removable. So if there's ever a buildup of wet food on the edges that can't get eaten, we can pull these plugs out and just hose out the entire trough. Now that I know that those drywall screws work, I'm going to pop one of these little corks off because the drywall screws are in the way to slide these stands over. I can actually slide both of them over from the same side, but the intent is for one of these to be on each end. And the neat thing about this is they can twist. So if the ground is not perfectly level, I can actually rotate one of them to make sure it's actually sitting flush with the ground. So now I need to figure out the actual eating trough situation. I decided to get the largest hole saw that I had that is less than the size of the opening at the end of the pipe. That's just because I didn't want the holes to be so big that the feed comes out of the sides. So these chickens are big enough now that I think they can stand up and reach this. We'll have to see later in this video how they actually interact with this feeder once I'm done. So what I ended up doing was putting 1 inch of space between each of these holes. And my hole saw was a bit cumbersome for this task. Maybe if I had my drill press accessible and a lot of clamps and a workbench and a workshop and all this stuff, maybe it could be easier. Right now I'm just trying to clamp the pipe in between my ankles, which isn't working very well because it's rotating on me. And then another thing that's happening is the teeth are binding and really ripping the drill out of my hand. So I'm doing my best to try to brace it with my calf so it can't slap me. But there's a few rough circles here, and I'm going to do my best to trim off the excess PVC and sand down any burrs. One thing I didn't really show you was that each of these PVC circles really got jammed up inside of the hole saw, so I had to completely take it apart between each hole, which made this process take exponentially longer than it should have. So now I have my first assembled trough feeder made out of a thin wall 4-inch PVC pipe. I'm going to climb into the chicken's tractor here just so I can fill this up. I don't really have a good scooping or dispersal mechanism for their feed, so basically what I'm going to do is use some old yogurt or cottage cheese container that I have lying around that I can squeeze down to pour into each of these holes. It's possible that maybe I could do like every other hole eventually, but for now I'm going to have to fill up each hole to try to get the trough relatively full. Well guys, I really need to get this video finished so I can upload it and have it published this week. So I'm going to end it here. There's still a lot of work to do on this chicken tractor, but it's definitely functional, as you can see here, and it's growing as our chickens grow. So maybe we'll have more of our routine and our features dialed in when it comes to actually process these meat birds. But for now, I'm going to go out and tend to them every day and take mental notes of what can be improved, how they act, how they eat. And if you want to follow along on our journey with us, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you back here next time on Kite Heart Homestead. Thanks for watching.